Have you ever kept a dress you never wore, just to prove to yourself you survived? Mine is sealed in a yellowing garment bag at the back of my closet, smelling faintly of lilies and dust. I was 23 when I learned what silence sounds like inside a church full of people. I thought that story ended in 1973. 50 years later, it knocked on my door. Before I tell you what he looked like on my porch, older, thinner, trembling, I have to take you back to the morning everything broke. To the lace, gloves I never slipped on. To the church bells that never rang for me. To the last day I believed life would go exactly as I planned. They say you can hear a Midwestern summer before you see it. The cicadas pulsing like a heartbeat behind the cottonwoods, the hum of lawnmowers drifting across neat squares of trimmed grass. On Saturday, June 16, 1973, my little Ohio town woke to a blue sky so bright it felt lacquered. The air smelled of cut lemons and hairspray in my parents' kitchen, where my mother had arranged daisies and baby's breath in coffee cans, insisting they open more if you spoke kindly to them. "Drink," she said, pushing a glass of orange juice toward me. "Sugar's up, nerves down." I smiled because that was easier than explaining the way my stomach had been doing tiny gymnast routines since dawn. I was a June bride. My dress hung from the pantry door. Ivory lace, satin buttons like pearls marching down the back. A skirt that swished softly when you shook it. The veil was my grandmother's. I had pinned it to a foam head the night before and slept with curlers that made my scalp ache. My best friend Maggie barreled through the screen door with an armful of glossy bridal magazines she'd hidden from me all week, in case you got cold feet and needed to remember how pretty your wedding is. Maggie always spoke in italics, the most enthusiastic girl in 3 counties. She wore hot pink bell-bottoms and a white halter top and smelled like Jean Naté. We were 23 and invincible, the kind of girls who put band posters on our dorm walls with scotch tape and believed love could make a life feel inevitable. "Today is it?" she sang, tapping the magazines on the table in rhythm with the AM radio. Carole King crooned from the little yellow set by the stove. My mother kept turning the volume down, and my father walked through the kitchen so many times he wore a small track in the linoleum. He was a man who liked problems he could hold in his hands. Loose hinges, leaky spigots, a lawn dark where the sprinkler mists fell. A wedding was a different kind of engineering. He kept patting his breast pocket, checking the ring box as if the gold could slip quietly away. "Daniel called?" he asked my mother, pretending to ask me. It wasn't distrust, more like the nervous jokes men make when they are about to give something precious away. "He called last night," I said, and felt the words like a warm penny in my palm. He was at his parents', you know. His mother and her lasagna before big days. I didn't say that he'd sounded tired. I didn't say that when I asked, "You'll be there," he'd answered, "I will, I swear it," in a voice that made the room go tight around me. He was nervous. Grooms are nervous. That's a thing people in movies always say. Daniel and I had met 2 autumns earlier in the campus library, both reaching for the same dog-eared copy of The Great Gatsby. He was taller than me by a head, with eyes like slate warmed by sunlight. He had a slow grin that moved only one corner of his mouth at a time. He loved baseball and poetry, greasy diners and the smell of gasoline, the hymnals on Sunday mornings, and the way Ohio cornfields looked in late September. He told me once that life felt like a long, straight 2-lane highway, and I had stepped into it like a song on the radio that he didn't know he knew by heart. In the bathroom mirror, I lined my lips the color of tea roses and powdered the shine away from my nose. The dress slid down my body like a soft sigh. Maggie stood behind me, zipping me with her tongue sticking out, the concentration face she used for algebra and bobby pins. My mother's hands trembled when she fastened the tiny pearl clasp at my throat. My father came in with his tie crooked and let my mother fix it, like always. I tucked a monogrammed handkerchief into my bouquet. "For happy tears," my mother said, and looked at me as if she could memorize my face in case it changed when my name did. Outside, the neighbors clustered near their porches to watch us drive away, women waving dish towels like flags. We piled into my father's Oldsmobile Cutlass, the vinyl seats hot against the backs of my knees. Someone had tied cans to the bumper too early, and they clattered on the driveway. My father got out and unknotted them with slow, careful hands, like diffusing a prank. St. Mary's wasn't a grand church, but the stained glass cut the sunlight into gem shapes that pooled on the floors. Pew bows, white satin, the aisle runner rolled out like a runway. I stepped into the vestibule, and Mrs. O'Malley, who had taught us catechism when we were children, pressed my fingers and whispered, "God loves a woman who keeps her promises, dear." The organist warmed up. 3 bars of Morning Has Broken, stately and sure. People turned to look. There was the rustle of dresses, a low murmur like a field at dusk. "Where is he?" Maggie asked, not because she doubted, because Maggie always wanted to be prepared for logistics. She was my planner, my schedule, my "did you bring safety pins?" "In the sacristy with Father Paul," I said, picturing Daniel standing with his brother Michael, the two of them comparing cufflinks. I imagined his father slapping his shoulder too hard and calling him son, like he did when he'd had 2 highballs. I imagined his mother smoothing his lapel, the way she'd smoothed mine at dinner, whispering, "My beautiful children, building lives." 10 minutes. The organist shifted to Pachelbel's canon, the prelude that told everyone we were close. Maggie peered around the corner, then snapped back with the wide eyes of a conspirator. I saw Michael. He looked flushed, but you know, best men, too much cologne, not enough sleep. She laughed. I laughed with her because laughter is the body's way of refusing the possibility of a cliff. Father Paul appeared, cheeks pink, hairline shining. He took my hands and squeezed them once. "You look radiant," he said. "Daniel will faint. If he does, I have salts." A joke, gentle as a pat on the head. 15 minutes. The air shifted, an almost imperceptible movement, like the way a storm announces itself by making the birds go still. My mother studied my face as if she heard it too and smoothed my veil again. "Timing is everything," she murmured. "He's probably praying." My father looked at his watch, heavy, silver, then at the double doors. He moved his jaw the way he did when he was chewing on something he didn't want to say. 20 minutes. People are patient at weddings. You add time without meaning to. A baby cried and was walked outside. The usher came back from the parking lot with a shrug that tried to smile. The organist faltered, stopped, flipped pages, began again. I tasted metal in my mouth like a bitten lip. "Stay here," my father said softly, and slipped away, taking the corridor toward the sacristy. I watched the back of him recede, the slope of his shoulders under the suit he wore to every important day of my life. My hands had gone cold. Maggie rubbed my arms, brisk and repetitive. "He's here," she whispered, as if saying it aloud could make it true. The corridor seemed to lengthen. Time stretched and thinned. A girl I had babysat last summer peered around her mother's skirt and grinned toothlessly at me. Mrs. O'Malley began to whisper to Mrs. Green, who shushed her in the way women shush other women when they're afraid the truth might arrive if you speak too loudly. My father returned, the way men return from wars with news no one wants. He was composed, the kind of composure that could turn to rage in a single word. "He's not in the sacristy," he said, too quiet. "Michael says he went to fetch something from the car." He stopped, swallowed. "That was a half hour ago." Silence isn't empty. It is full of all the sentences you don't want to hear. I thought of Daniel's hands, square, capable, the way he held coffee cups with both palms in the morning, as if warming. Them were an act of love. I thought of the promise we had said to each other 2 nights ago under the maple in my parents' yard. "I'll be there," he'd said. I had whispered back, "I know." Father Paul reappeared, then disappeared, moving like a man who wanted to avoid being seen by anyone who might ask questions. Maggie's face had changed, still brave, but with a gloss of fear over it, like polish over a bruise. "Okay," she said brightly. "We can do jokes. You know, what's the difference between—" "Don't," I said. It came out harsher than I meant. She flinched, then nodded, guilt and devotion battling on her features. She pressed a peppermint into my palm like a prayer bead. My mother took charge because mothers do. "We'll give it 10 more minutes," she said, as if the universe were subject to scheduling. "If the car stalled, darling, maybe your father can drive to—" She stopped because she remembered that my father didn't know how to be in 2 places at once either. We gave it 10 more minutes. And then 10 more. The organist's hands began to tremble. Someone switched to a hymn, the kind that holds you upright in grief. The baby, now pacified, slept on its mother's shoulder, mouth open. In a pew near the front, Daniel's aunt twisted her gloves until they looked like rope. Michael finally arrived, his tie loose, his forehead dotted with sweat. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He began, then failed. Maybe he got turned around. "Turned around?" my father repeated, voice like gravel. "On Oak Street?" Michael swallowed. "I'll keep looking." It takes a while for humiliation to reach the surface. First, you feel confusion like cold water down your back. Then the heat comes, rushing upward. I could feel it climb, my neckline tight, my scalp prickling beneath the combs that held my veil. The daisies my mother had spoken to looked up at me like 100 small, blank faces. Someone in the second pew, the butcher's wife, audibly sighed. The sound sliced me. I stepped backward until my shoulder bumped the vestibule wall, found the coolness with the skin between my blade bones, and pressed there. I imagined the phone on its little table in the sacristy, rotary dial waiting. I saw Daniel's mother's kitchen, the avocado refrigerator with the magnet that said, "Kiss the cook," and the bowl of oranges she kept filled because she believed in vitamin C as a shield against catastrophe. I pictured their driveway, Daniel's father's Oldsmobile, the oil stain shaped like a country I didn't want to visit. I pictured Daniel walking toward that car, his jacket flung over his shoulder the way he did, whistling, keys spinning on his finger, stopping because what? Maggie's hand slid into mine, small and hot. "We can go," she whispered. "If we go now, we can say, 'He was delayed, he'll meet you.'" She stopped, because the lie would land like a dead bird between us. I lifted my chin as if there were cameras, as if a poise I borrowed could carry me across the next few minutes. I wanted to save my parents from pity, my father from rage, Maggie from absorbing my tremble as her own. I wanted to save myself from the picture I could already see developing. Me at the altar, alone, the town, talking, the dress, a shell with no creature inside. Father Paul returned again, ashen, with a small smile stapled to his face. He began softly. "We've decided to let the guests go into the hall for refreshments while we sort out a small mix-up." A small mix-up. The words were so absurd I nearly laughed. People stood, quietly, the scrape of wood benches loud as thunder. No one looked directly at me. It felt like a funeral, and I was the widow and the corpse. Maggie tugged me toward the ladies' lounge because women understand the geography of crisis. You go where there are couches and sinks and mirrors and tissue boxes. I stood at the sink and watched my face in the glass, the careful eyeshadow, the lipstick no longer perfect, the veil, a white cloud floating stupidly around my head. I took the combs out. The veil slithered down my arms like something slipping away. "I'll find him," Maggie said. She stopped because she knew that whatever she could find would not be what I wanted. I pressed both palms flat on the cool porcelain and felt the building beneath me, old brick, solid, indifferent to human stories. Somewhere down the hall, a tray dropped and an ant exclaimed, and the small sounds of life kept happening, right on. Time, despite mine. When I walked back toward the vestibule, my parents were waiting. My father's jaw had gone hard. My mother's eyes were calm in the way a lake is calm the moment before a storm splits it open. She took my hand. "We can leave," she said. "We can leave before anyone says anything they can't take back." Leave. The word was a door. I could walk through it and out and into the blistering 2 o'clock light and into a future that had just rearranged itself without my permission. I could leave. I took one step, then another. The satin of my skirt hissed softly as I moved. The aisle runner lay ahead, white as a dare. I did not look at the pews. I did not look at the altar that had been dressed for me. I walked, not as a bride, but as a woman who has realized that the only way out of a story is through. My bouquet tilted. A daisy fell and landed face down on the runner like a small, defeated sun. On the church steps, the daylight struck me like a slap. The sky had warmed to the color of a robin's egg. Somewhere, a lawnmower droned on. A little boy in a tie too tight stared at me with frank curiosity. I stepped aside to let a couple pass. The woman touched my arm without looking at me, a reflex of kindness. The parking lot glittered with windshields. Behind me, the bells did not ring. I didn't run. I wanted to. I wanted to gather my dress and sprint until the lace tore and the air shocked my lungs. Instead, I walked down the steps with my mother's hand on my elbow and my father flanking my other side like guardrails. The Oldsmobile waited, obstinate and gleaming. My father opened the back door and I ducked inside, and the dress made a sound like paper being crumpled. Maggie slid in beside me, breathless, eyes red. "I'm here," she said unnecessarily. As we pulled away, the church windows flashed sunlight at me in quick, blinding blinks. A kid on a Schwinn rode past, one hand holding a melted popsicle, red trail down his wrist. At Sioux, the corner, we stopped for the longest red light of my life. I watched the cross street, the cars rolling by, any one of them possibly his. I waited for a familiar Oldsmobile, a horn, a face, a hand raised in apology, in relief, in explanation. None of them were him. When the light changed, my father pressed his foot to the gas and the car moved forward obediently, like a life nudged into motion by a decision you didn't get to make. I didn't cry until we turned onto our street and I saw the maple tree in front of our house, the one under which we'd promised each other always. The sight of it cracked something in me. The sound I made surprised me. Animal, low, the noise of a trap closing. Maggie gripped my hand, and my mother made the small, rhythmic shh mothers make to infants and grieving dogs. My father stared straight ahead, eyes hot and dry. We parked. The world was exactly as we had left it 4 hours earlier. Coffee cups in the sink, the ghost smell of toast. I stood in the doorway of my childhood kitchen in a wedding dress that would never see an aisle. The daisies in their cans looked tired already, their heads heavier than a flower's head should be. I set the bouquet on the table. Petals flurried off like confetti thrown by no one. Upstairs, I peeled myself out of the dress and hung it in the closet, the satin slippery against my fingers. I closed the door gently, as if I were not burying something. When I lay down on my bed, the ceiling looked very far away. I counted the cracks in the paint until they turned to a map of a place I never planned to go. Somewhere in town, people were already telling the story. They would smooth it with their tongues until it became a parable. They would assign motives, because motives make it easier to endure other people's pain. They would measure my worth by the shape of this day. I stared at the place where the ceiling meets the wall and thought one thought over and over until it became a drumbeat. He will call. He will call. He will call. He did not call. And that is how my life, my old life, ended, without bells, without vows, without witness, except for the daisies and the dust motes and the girl who learned in an afternoon how silence can be the loudest thing you ever hear. The Monday after the wedding that wasn't, the morning paper arrived on our porch with damp corners. The headlines were about Watergate hearings and gas prices, but for me the only news was what people whispered over their fences and, in the aisles of Kroger, "She's the girl who got left." Small towns don't need reporters to spread stories. They have Mrs. Green at the hair salon, who tells Mrs. Whitman at the bakery, who tells her husband, who tells the boys at the bar. By Wednesday, I could feel the words following me like shadows. When I walked into the pharmacy for aspirin, conversations softened. When I passed the diner, faces turned. No one said it outright, but the silence had a flavor, pity salted with curiosity. My parents tried to shield me. My mother fussed over chores, cleaning cupboards that didn't need cleaning. My father slammed nails into the porch railing just to hit something that would stay where he put it. Maggie sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, flipping through record sleeves, trying to make me laugh with her crooked impressions of David Cassidy. But even her laughter couldn't drown the single question that throbbed in every corner of my mind. Why? I called Daniel's parents' house once, on E-Key, Tuesday evening. His mother answered. Her voice was dry, exhausted, like she'd been crying for days. "Is he there?" I asked, gripping the receiver so tightly the cord left imprints on my palm. Silence stretched, long enough that I thought the line had gone dead. Then she said, "He's gone, dear. Don't call again." And the click of the receiver was final, like a coffin closing. Gone where? With whom? Why not me? The questions swarmed, but answers were locked behind doors I couldn't open. By September, I couldn't bear the sideways glances anymore. I packed a suitcase and told my parents I was moving to Cleveland. My father loaded the trunk in silence. My mother pressed an envelope into my hand with $50 and 3 recipes she thought would keep me from starving. Maggie drove me, her pink Beetle crammed with all my records and sweaters. She tried to keep up a steady chatter, but when we crossed the county line, she just reached for my hand. We rode the rest of the way in, quiet, the hum of the road filling in for the words neither of us knew how to say. Cleveland was louder, dirtier, and mercifully indifferent. No one cared who I was or what had happened at St. Mary's. I found a room to rent above a bakery that smelled of yeast and sugar, and I took a job as a secretary for a law office downtown. My days filled with typewriters clacking, phones ringing, men dictating letters I barely listened to. At night, I walked the city blocks just to feel small in the neon, and exhaust, one anonymous face among thousands. But anonymity doesn't erase memory. Some nights, when the streetlights blinked through my window, I would imagine Daniel's knock, his apology, his arms pulling me back into the life I'd lost. Other nights, I imagined confronting him in fury, demanding why he had carved a hollow into my future and left me to live inside it. Men came and went. There was Tom, a gentle draftsman who smelled of pencil shavings and always held doors open. I liked him. But when he asked me to meet his family, my throat closed up. Then there was Eddie, a jazz musician who played trumpet in a dim bar and kissed like he was tasting secrets. He proposed after 6 months. I said no before he finished the question. Each time, I told myself I was too busy, too cautious, too something. But the truth was simpler. Daniel's ghost lived between me and every man who tried to love me. The 70s rolled on. Oil crises, disco fever, women's liberation. I watched other women burn, their bras, and claim their independence, and I told myself I was part of that wave too. But deep inside, my independence wasn't chosen. It was forced. My life had split on a June afternoon, and I was walking the path that remained because the other had vanished with him. Even so, I built small victories. I learned to balance my own checkbook. I bought a second-hand Chevy that coughed on cold mornings but carried me wherever I needed to go. I got promoted, then promoted again, until the attorneys began to consult me as if I were one of them. I bought my own dresses, my own furniture, even a little color television. I was proving, to them, to myself, that a woman could be whole, even when half of her heart had been stolen. But on quiet nights, when the bakery downstairs had closed and the smell of yeast was replaced by the emptiness of city air, I would lie awake and picture the church aisle, the white runner, the empty doorway where he should have been. 50 years is a long time to live. With silence. But in those early years, I could already feel how permanent it might become. And that was the beginning of my second life, the life of the girl everyone pitied, who turned herself into a woman no one dared to pity anymore. But no matter how strong I became, the ghost of June 16, 1973, walked beside me, whispering what might have been. When people imagine a life alone, they picture empty chairs and cold dinners. But life alone isn't empty. It's crowded with the voices you invent to fill the silence, with the choices you make only for yourself, with the echoes of the paths you never walked. The 1980s came dressed in shoulder pads and ambition. By then, I was 30 and managing the front office of a mid-sized law firm in downtown Cleveland. I had learned to walk briskly in heels across marble floors, to type contracts faster than most men could dictate them, to smile politely at clients who looked past me as if I were part of the furniture. Some nights, when the attorneys left files stacked high on my desk, I stayed late, working by the glow of fluorescent lights, feeling proud that I had turned humiliation into competence. At first, I thought my independence was temporary. I told myself I'd remarry one day, that my story wasn't finished. But months became years, and my single bed stopped feeling temporary. I stopped saying, "not yet," when people asked if I wanted children. Instead, I said, "No, I'm too busy." And soon, the lie grew into a truth I wore, comfortably. I bought a small house on the west side, a modest 2-story with peeling paint and a stubborn maple tree in the yard. The mortgage terrified me, but the first night I slept there, surrounded by boxes and silence, I realized it was mine. Every squeak of the stairs, every drip of the faucet, every echo of my footsteps belonged to me. It was the first time since 1973 that I felt I owned something that couldn't be taken away. I filled the house with things I loved. Books stacked like towers, mismatched mugs from thrift stores, plants that refused to die no matter how much I neglected them. I adopted a cat, a scrawny black stray I named Duchess, because every queen deserves a court, even if it's just one cat. Still, loneliness came knocking in subtle ways. Christmas dinners at Maggie's house, watching her children open gifts, laughing with her husband in that easy way couples have after years together. Baby showers, weddings, anniversaries, events that reminded me of the life I had almost lived. I celebrated with them, genuinely happy, but always with a small ache under my ribs, like a bruise that never fully healed. The decades rolled by. The world changed. Computers invaded the office, then the internet, then emails that stole the rhythm of the typewriter. I adapted because I had to. Adaptation became my secret talent. I was the dependable one, the woman who never left early for a sick child, who never needed maternity leave, who could always be counted on to stay late. The attorneys rewarded me with raises and eventually a management role. I became the woman younger secretaries came to for advice, the quiet figure they called Miss H with respect. But at night, when I took off the blazer and heels, I was just me. Just the woman who once stood in a white dress waiting for a man who never came. There were moments of joy, of course. I traveled, New York, San Francisco, even Paris once, on a tour with Maggie. I stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, dizzy with the thought that a girl from Ohio who had once been humiliated in front of her whole town was now halfway across the world, sipping wine in a cafe. I learned French phrases I promptly forgot, but I kept the memory of sitting on the Seine's edge, watching the lights dance on the water, feeling alive in a way that had nothing to do with romance. I found comfort in books, Jane Austen, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison. Their words stitched something inside me, reminding me that women had survived far worse, and still built lives that mattered. I joined a book club, and though I rarely spoke, I listened. Listening became my gift. But sometimes the silence was heavier than any book could lift. Duchess died after 14 years, and the house echoed louder than ever. I tried another cat, then a dog, but nothing filled the space quite the same. Nights grew long, especially in winter when snow pressed against the windows like a white curtain. I sat by the radio, listening to old records, and wondered where Daniel was. Was he married? Did he have children? Did he ever think of me when he poured his morning coffee? I pretended I didn't care. I told myself I had built a strong, beautiful life, and in many ways I had. But deep down, the unanswered question was a splinter under my skin. Why did he leave me? By the time I retired at 65, I was proud of what I had built. I had savings, a little pension, a home that was finally paid off. Maggie's grandchildren called me Auntie, and I spoiled them as if they were mine. My hair had silvered, my face lined, but when I looked in the mirror, I still saw the girl in the veil sometimes, the girl who had been so certain of her future. I told myself I had made peace with it, that I didn't need closure, that not all stories get endings. I told myself the past was a ghost I had finally buried. But ghosts, as I would soon learn, have a way of finding you again. And one autumn evening, 50 years after that church fell silent, there came a knock at my door. And the ghost I had carried in silence for half a century was suddenly standing on my porch in the flesh. It was October, the kind of Ohio autumn that smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves, when the past found me again. I was 73, retired, and perfectly content with my small rituals. Morning tea, an afternoon walk around the block, evenings spent with my knitting or an old novel. My hair had thinned, my joints ached when rain threatened, but my days were peaceful, predictable, safe. That night, the sky was bruised purple, and the air carried that dry chill that sneaks into your bones once summer is truly gone. I had just settled into my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea when I heard it. 3 soft knocks at the front door. I almost didn't get up. At my age, most knocks came from delivery men or neighbors, but something about the rhythm, hesitant, almost pleading, pulled me to my feet. When I opened the door, my breath caught. There he was. Nagkwai. Old man stood on my porch, shoulders hunched beneath a worn wool coat. His hair was silver, thinning at the crown, and his hands trembled slightly at his sides. His face was lined, but those eyes, those unmistakable gray eyes, once bright as slate in sunlight, looked back at me with something between terror and hope. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks, that maybe I had fallen asleep in my chair and was dreaming a cruel dream. But then he whispered my name. Clara. The sound of it nearly buckled my knees. 50 years of silence, broken in 2 syllables. I gripped the doorframe, my heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Memories rushed at me like a storm, the church aisle, the daisies in their cans, the vacant doorway, the girl in the veil, and now the man who had left her standing there. Daniel! My voice cracked around his name, rusted from disuse. He nodded, his throat working as if swallowing stones. "It's me. I wasn't sure you'd still live here." A dozen responses flared inside me: anger, disbelief, the urge to slam the door, the urge to collapse into tears. Instead, I stood frozen, clutching the frame as if it could hold me upright. "What do you want?" I asked finally. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but 50 years of pain has edges you can't always smooth. His eyes glistened. "To explain, to ask for your forgiveness, to tell you the truth." I laughed, a bitter, broken laugh that startled even me. "The truth? Daniel, you had 50 years to tell me the truth." "I know." He lowered his gaze, shame etched into every crease of his face. "I know, and I've hated myself every day for it. But if I die with this unsaid, then it'll be like I left you at that altar all over again." The silence between us was thick, heavy with ghosts. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to protect the fragile peace I'd built over decades. But another part, older, wiser, perhaps lonelier, needed to know. Needed to finally hear the words that had been denied me since 1973. Against every instinct, I stepped aside. "Come in." He crossed the threshold slowly, as if afraid the floor might reject him. Inside, he removed his coat with stiff, careful movements. His frame had thinned, but I could still see the shadow of the young man who once made my heart race. We sat across from each other in my living room, two relics of a past neither of us had escaped. My tea had gone cold. His hands shook as he clasped them together, leaning forward. "I never stopped loving you, Clara," he began. His voice broke, and tears glimmered in the corners of his eyes. "But there were things I couldn't tell you then. Things that made me leave that church even though it tore me apart." I folded my arms, my nails biting into my skin. "Then say it. After 50 years, Daniel, say it." He took a shaky breath, his whole body trembling as if bracing for impact. And with that, the truth began to surface. The truth that would unravel everything I thought I knew about that day. He sat forward on the edge of my sofa, his trembling hands locked together, as if in prayer. For a long time, he couldn't look at me. The silence stretched until I thought I might explode from it. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. I left you because I was told if I married you, you'd be killed." My breath caught. For a moment, I didn't even understand the words. It sounded like the plot of some gangster film, not the explanation for the wreckage of my life. I shook my head. "Killed? Daniel, what are you talking about?" He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking up to mine, raw with shame. "My father. He wasn't the man everyone thought he was. He owed money, a lot of money, to the wrong people." I froze, my mind scrambling through memories. His father's heavy drinking, his sudden disappearances, the way Daniel's family left town so abruptly after the wedding. Things that had never made sense. He was in deep with organized crime. Daniel continued, his voice breaking. "The Cleveland underworld, loan sharks, men who didn't forgive debts. The morning of our wedding, they came to me, 2 of them. They told me if I went through with marrying you, they'd make sure you disappeared." I stared at him, my heart slamming against my ribs. His words twisted the past like a knife. "And you believed them?" I had to. His hands shook so badly he pressed them against his knees to steady them. I knew what they were capable of. I'd seen it. Men beaten half to death, businesses burned to the ground. I couldn't risk it. I thought leaving you there, humiliated, broken, was the only way to save your life. My chest burned with a mix of fury and grief. "So instead of telling me, instead of letting me decide, you just vanished? You let me think you were a coward, a liar, a man who didn't love me enough to show up?" Tears spilled down his lined cheeks. I thought silence was safer. If you knew the truth, they might have come after you anyway. So I cut myself out of your life, hoping they'd forget you, hoping you'd be safe if you hated me. I stood, pacing the room because I couldn't sit still. The carpet felt hot under my feet. 50 years of confusion and pain had just been handed an explanation, but the explanation wasn't a balm, it was gasoline. You destroyed me, I said, my voice shaking. You let me carry that shame for decades. Do you know what it's like to live your whole life as the girl left at the altar? To build everything alone because you couldn't trust anyone again? He bent forward, his face in his hands. His voice was muffled but desperate. I know. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't even touch it. I thought I was saving you, Clara, but I ruined you instead. For the first time since I'd opened the door, I looked at him not as the boy I once loved, but as the old man he had become. Tired, broken, haunted. The weight of 50 years hung between us, too heavy for either of us to carry alone. I sank, back into my chair, my hands trembling. Why now? I whispered. Why tell me after all this time? He lifted his head, his eyes wet but steady. Because I'm dying. The words hit me like a blow. I don't have long, he continued softly. The doctors say months, maybe less. I couldn't leave this world without telling you the truth, without telling you that I loved you then, and I've loved you every day since. The room tilted, my heart torn between fury and grief, love and hate. 50 years of silence, shattered by a secret that changed everything and nothing. I closed my eyes, my chest heaving. The life I had lived, the choices I had made, the loneliness I had carried, all traced back to this moment, this secret, this man. And now, at 73, I was left with a question I never thought I'd face again. Could I forgive him? For a long time after his confession, I couldn't speak. My tongue felt heavy, my throat tight, as though words might choke me if I tried to force them out. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the old clock on my mantel, each second striking like a hammer. Finally, the words tore themselves free. You ruined me, Daniel. His eyes lifted, wide and stricken, but I didn't stop. Decades of silence boiled to the surface, bitter and unstoppable. You talk about saving me, saving my life. But what kind of life did you leave me with? Do you know what it feels like to stand in front of a whole town in a wedding dress, waiting for a man who never comes? To see pity in every pair of eyes for years after? My voice cracked, but I pushed harder, louder. I was a spectacle, a shame, a joke. They didn't whisper about your debts, Daniel. They whispered about me. He flinched, his hands trembling in his lap. I thought it was the only way. The only way for who? I snapped. For me or for you? He swallowed hard, his lips pressed into a line. I pressed my palms to my chest as though I could hold my own heart in place. Do you have any idea what I lost that day? A marriage, children, a family of my own. Do you know how many nights I lay awake in that empty bed, wondering what I had done wrong? How many men I pushed away because I couldn't trust them to stay? I built a whole life out of the rubble you left me standing in. Tears burned hot down my cheeks. And you think telling me this now, at the end of your life, fixes anything? His face crumpled, his voice breaking. No, I don't think it fixes anything. I know it doesn't. I couldn't leave this world without you knowing I didn't stop loving you. That it wasn't because I didn't want you, it was because I did. The cruelty of it nearly broke me. Love, the one thing I'd always wanted from him, dangled in front of me too late. I stood and moved toward the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. Outside, the streetlight threw a pale circle on the pavement. 50 years ago, I would have prayed for this moment, for an explanation, for proof that I wasn't unworthy of love. Now it only felt like ashes. Behind me, I heard him stand, his movements stiff, labored. "I don't ask you to forgive me," he said softly. "I don't deserve that. I just ask you to understand why." I turned, fury and sorrow twisting together in my chest. "Understand? You took everything from me, and you want me to understand?" For a moment, neither of us moved. Two old souls standing on opposite shores of the same ruined river. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, he said, "I punished myself every day. I never married. I never had children. I never let myself be happy. Because I didn't think I deserved it. I chose your safety, Clara, but I lost everything else, just like you did." The words hit me like stones, harsh, heavy, undeniable. I saw not the boy who had abandoned me, but the man who had lived 50 years under the same ghost I carried. I sank back into my chair, exhausted, my anger crackling into something quieter. Grief. Regret. A hollow ache that matched his. We sat in silence for a long time. Two lives, parallel and broken, finally colliding after half a century. And I knew then that the next choice, the choice of whether to forgive him or not, would define the rest of my days. The days that followed were restless. Sleep came in broken pieces, full of half-dreams where I stood once again at the altar, or woke to find Daniel's young face beside me, only to roll over and remember the truth. I told myself I should shut the door on him forever. That forgiveness wasn't required, not after what he had taken from me. And yet, every morning I found myself listening for his knock again. When he returned 2 days later, he looked even smaller under the weight of his coat. I almost didn't let him in, but something in his eyes, pleading, fragile, softened me. I poured us tea, though neither of us touched it. We sat in the same silence as before, but it felt different now. Less like battle, more like truce. That night, after he left, I found myself digging through the back of my closet. My hands pushed past old coats, forgotten shoes, until they landed on it, the garment bag, yellowed with time. I pulled it down, unzipped it, and there it was, the wedding dress. Fragile lace, stiff with age, the satin buttons still marching down the back. I laid it across my bed and sat beside it, running my fingers over the fabric. For 50 years, I had kept it like a gravestone, proof of the life I'd lost. But now, looking at it, I realized something. It wasn't just a symbol of loss. It was proof I had survived, proof that I had walked away, carried the weight, and built a life anyway. The next morning, I called Maggie. She was still my anchor, even after all these decades. We met for coffee, and when I told her Daniel had come back, her spoon clattered against the saucer. "You let him in?" she asked, disbelief sharp in her voice. "I did," I admitted. Her eyes softened, though her tone stayed firm. "Clara, be careful. He broke you once. Don't let him do it again." "I know," I whispered. "But Maggie, what if this isn't about love anymore? What if it's about peace?" She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then make sure it's your peace, not his." That evening, Daniel and I walked together by the lake on the edge of town. The same lake where we'd carved our initials into a tree all those years ago. The tree was still there, older, thicker, scarred with the wounds of time. Our letters had faded, but I could still trace them, with my fingertips. Daniel stood beside me, his breath ragged in the crisp autumn air. "I used to dream about this place," he said softly. "About us." I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the boy I had once loved, not the ghost I had hated, but the man standing here now, a man nearing the end of his life, carrying the same regret I carried. I can't give you back what we lost, I said. Neither of us can. But maybe we don't have to end with bitterness. His eyes shone. Does that mean you forgive me? I paused, searching myself. Forgiveness had always felt impossible, like betraying the younger me who had suffered so much. But in that moment, standing by the tree with autumn leaves swirling around us, I realized forgiveness wasn't about excusing him. It was about releasing myself. I don't know if I forgive you, I said carefully, but I don't want to hate you anymore. That's enough for me. He nodded, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. And for the first time in 50 years, I felt a strange, unexpected lightness in my chest. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the rooftops like powdered sugar, and the lake froze into a sheet of glass. Daniel and I began seeing each other a few afternoons a week, not as lovers, not in the way of youth, but as two old souls who had shared a story too unfinished to leave untold. We drank tea at my kitchen table. We walked slowly around the block, pausing so he could catch his breath. We talked about books, about the music we used to love, about the world that had changed around us. Sometimes we sat in silence, and that was enough. People in town whispered again, of course, just like they had in 1973. Only this time, I didn't care. I was too old to be defined by their curiosity. Let them wonder. They hadn't lived my life, or carried my silence, or waited 50 years for a knock that finally came. Daniel grew weaker as the weeks passed. His hands trembled more, his steps slowed. Some days his memory faltered, and he called me by my younger name, Claire Bear, the silly nickname he'd once used when we were students. I didn't correct him. I just held his hand. One evening, as the snow fell thick outside my window, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "If I could do it all again," he whispered, "I'd fight them. I'd marry you anyway. I'd take whatever came as long as it meant you and me." I pressed his hand between mine. "We can't rewrite the past, Daniel, but we can choose how the story ends." A few months later, he was gone, quietly, in his sleep, as though the universe finally released him from a punishment he had carried half a century. At the funeral, I stood among strangers, nieces, cousins, distant friends, people who had never known the young man who once promised me forever. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't tell them about the daisies or the dress or the silence that had defined my life. I simply said, "He was a man who made mistakes, but he loved deeply. Sometimes that's all we can hope for." And when I walked away from his grave, I felt lighter. Not healed, scars don't vanish, but lighter, as though I'd finally set down a burden I wasn't meant to carry into the end of my own life. Now, when I look at the wedding dress still hanging in my closet, I don't see failure. I don't see shame. I see a girl who survived heartbreak, a woman who built her own life, and an old soul who found closure in the twilight of her years. I was left at the altar in 1973. That part of the story will never change. But 50 years later, he came back, not to rewrite the past, but to remind me that even broken stories can still have an ending worth telling. And perhaps that is the lesson of my life. Love is not always about the years you spend together, but about the courage to face the truth, even if it comes too late.